Oh, thank you. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we're good. Is that?
All right. We're broadcast ready. Camera roll. So I'm all alone today, so welcome to the Brunel University Performance Research Seminar, broadcast live from the Brunel Drama Studio. We are very happy today to have a special guest who will be introduced by my colleague Fiona Templeton. Please enjoy and welcome to our seminar series. Fiona.
Hi, it's my pleasure to introduce Caroline. I've known her work for quite a few years, and I've always been in great admiration and eager to hear what she's up to next. The collection before last, I wrote a blurb for the back of the book, so I'll read that to you. This collection opens up the sweep of Caroline Bergvall's intertwining of disciplines, as well as zooming into luminous seams of language where the microscope reveals universes. From a folding in of language, the performed in a body, ripened to bursting, sows performance in attention's body. Cultures in a morpheme, narratives in a fract, history in a sign, things in a life, the mind in a woman in print. Writings polygendering, braiding authorship, layering thought. Politics of the tongue, honest, acute, visceral, ludic, funny. Arising too in the social, the contextualized projects return the gift, both seducing forward as sound and details compelling wait, re-said, rehear it, relived, replay, reread and reread it. And then she came out with another incredible collection called Medal English. And I think that's some of what she's going to talk about here. I heard her talk about it at the British Library and was knocked out, so hope you will too.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Fiona. I'm going to start sitting down, but for the camera, but actually it'd be easier for me if I can, I think, move around a little bit. I want to talk about, I've been invited to talk about my work, and I thought I would do it through the angle of this book, Medal English, and I will be taking you through some of the aspects of this book, because it's a collection that contains both poetic pieces, performance pieces, and residues of other kinds of materials that I put together for this work. I just want to read a very quick or a short section from the piece that closes this collection. It's called Cat in the Throat, and it's a sort of introduction to some of the things that I'd like to talk about as I introduce you to some of the other work that I've been doing. I think, I mean, the talk is there. It could be that I sort of mess it up several times, so we'll see how it goes. Notably with the PowerPoint slide, there's always an issue there. In French, to clear one's throat is to have a cat in the throat, avoir un chat dans la gorge. One needs to spit out a cat to clear one's throat. Literally, un crachat is a spittle. One could also clear one's throat and realize that one has spat out French slang, une chatte, a pussy. This adds and maintains a crucial libidinal and erotic bond with one's pussycat. As I become aware that I'm trying to speak, my body morphs, my cat appears. Cat is the tone in my speech, its accentedness, its orthography. Cat is my speech's subjective accent, the intonation of my verbal patterns, the stutter in my silences, and all-around explicit accentedness. But what if I were to decide to speak with a cat in the throat? English speakers don't so much struggle with cats as with frogs. It's a croaking frog that one would need to spit out in English. Given the dubious and long-standing historical traffic of culinary jokes and insults between the French, frogs, and the English, roast beef, And bearing in mind the old wars of invasion and occupation between the two countries, one could here speculate that having a frog in the throat resonates more with military and political history and the known influence of French on the development of the English vocabulary than with strictly contemporary matters. Not so if one believes the American poet John Ashbery's line, "I hear the toad crooning." As many of us are finding ourselves with much increased frequency, living in countries in which we were not born, or where we are first or second generation citizens, or long-standing residents, or new arrivants, there is an interrupted experience of the past and of the living locale, whether we do or don't experience ourselves as diasporic. Whoever needs to create an allegiance or a correspondence, sometimes seemingly from scratch or from access points hidden from view to a mixed cultural background, to a complex living jigsaw of multiple markers and untranslated biographical circumstances, will also often question what linguistic belonging means, what fluency entails. To seek this out in the fluency of language, in the connective and lubricated tissues of language and around language, is to speak and work with a cat in the throat. The piece that I'm showing behind here is a piece called Ampersand, which I show, it's all the ampersands of my Mac of a few years ago, treated as a permutational piece with endless variations. So perhaps to make it a little bit more sort of concrete beyond or through this final text, the questions that have motivated my work as a writer I kind of try and summarize them into 4 different main points that allow me to think about this idea of being a writer who works in performative ways in sort of different, across these different sort of lines of interest. The first thing is this idea of the question of multiple languages. Where and how one writes when one has not one language but several languages, not only of origin but also of assimilation, of acquisition. And this, of course, leads one to think about linguistic invention, language attrition, aphasia, new kinds also of linguistic behavior. There's also this idea of the use of multiple forms and spaces of inscription, the fact that as a writer, I feel that the page is only one of the elements that will inhabit the final manifestations of my work. I sort of part of perhaps a growing generation that uses the literary and has a whole understanding of the literary and literary history, and also thinks of literature in relation to a slice in time, and understands the whole idea of the digital culture as something that allows for other kinds of interactions and other kinds of intellectual and cognitive processes to do with language and inscription. So I work a lot with audiovisual literacies, and I think a lot about ideas of space and sight. And as you'll see, I've done a few installations, and I find that that way of being able to open up my work as a writer into different kinds of questions that sometimes are more appropriate outside the book and in other environments is a way of sort of informing and enriching my understanding of the book form itself. So there is that understanding. There's also, of course, the fact that this whole idea of finding myself as a writer in environments that are not per se given over to writing immediately sort of has forced me to, first of all, be in collaborations with other artists that perhaps master or have an understanding of sound in space, or artists that may be architects or that have an understanding of spatial manipulation of movement of the audience or of the listeners. So you add, as much as you, so you add to your, I add to my knowledge and to my understanding of writing, I add these elements. They also therefore challenge my understanding of writing, because it is very difficult to represent the writerly in installed spaces, or at least it presents new challenges. And I'll show you at the end of this, I'll show you a video of a recent installation where I am for the first time perhaps using much more intense sort of textual and literary materials as part of an installed environment. There's a long history, of course, of text and space and text and sight, and some of you might be interested in talking about later. I find it important in the way I introduce my practice, notably in environments like this one, that I specify that I come through writing and with writing and as a writer, and it is with this that I think about the transformation of writerly and literary culture. Another element which becomes one of the leitmotifs of my work has to do with ideas of representation. Representation also through the performing body. So an understanding of myself as writer as also a performer of my own work. In the recent work that I'm thinking about now, I am sort of starting to delegate some of the text over to other voices. I have previously given my voice over to other people's treatments of the text. And I'm becoming more interested in the idea of multiplicity of voices, which actually are also actual verbal voices inhabited by other performers than myself. This is, of course, very familiar for theatrical performances, but not something that I have been doing so much of as someone coming out of poetry. Slideshow. This is a piece by an artist and writer called Tom Lubbock called Political. I was trying to summarize in one word, having looked a little bit at my methods, or not my methods actually, but perhaps more my approach. I haven't talked about methods so much yet. My method, my willingness to enter into different kinds of environments. I was thinking a little bit about if there was one word that could summarize aspects that have been of interest to me in the last, let's say, decade. And I suppose that word, with all its complications, is the word borders. Borders as a leitmotif and as an aspect of the necessity in the work, the notion of place in motion, but also of ideas of place stratified, shut down, open borders, the notion of configurations, limits and pushes that could be between senses and letters and people, what it means to cross and be disconnected or to connect up. Borders as they define us and as we need to undo them. And I look at borders also in relation to the mouth, the fact of having an accent, how much that border of the accent actually sort of places suddenly the mouth, the accent, as an other social border. The problem or question of borders is a problem about crossing, traversing and translating. A problem of crossing is a problem of passing. Passing as someone or something when one crosses into or in order to cross. The crossing is conditional, yet having crossed can become unconditional, can remain also unfinished. In some cases, one is never done with crossing the border. The crossing often implies transformation, translation, untranslation, since there can be no crossing without an awareness that one is crossing. Or can there be? Is the crossing in the awareness that one is crossing, that one has crossed? And there's a passage that I brought with me from Helen Sixu, which is from her book 3 Steps on the Ladder of Writing, which some of you might know, which is all to do with passages and borders and transformations through dream, through language, and here also through the awareness of what a border might be. So let me just find you this section, and in the meantime, yeah, I'll just read it first. This is a small section called My Borders. We are going to cross over borders just as we recross borders without knowing anything about it. Where is our border? When I cross a border, it's my border I'm crossing, though I don't know which one I'm crossing or which side I end up on. This is the charm of crossing the border, but it is also what can constitute its distressing side. The border makes up the homeland. It prohibits and gives passage in the same stroke. How do we cross borders? It can be done in a completely indifferent, apathetic fashion. Although the person who crosses borders in an indifferent fashion never crosses borders. The person who doesn't tremble while crossing a border doesn't know there is a border and doesn't cast doubt on their own definition. The person who trembles while crossing a border casts doubt on their own definition, not only on their passport, not only on their driver's license, but also on every aspect and form of their definition. From the definition of age, which we talk about very little, to the definition that concerns us all the time, and which is at the same time the one we can't or won't reply to, that of sexual definition. What nature are we? What species are we? A beautiful book, 3 Steps on the Ladder of Writing. Now, I was describing, this is a piece by Chris O'Feely, which is in response to Paul Gilroy's There Is No Black in the Union Jack. That was part of his piece when he presented it at the Venice Biennial. And I bring it here because a lot of my work has been, my recent work has been really to think about language detail. And you'll see that the piece that I'm about to talk about now is a piece called Say Parsley, which is based on the Shibboleth. Now, the Shibboleth is a sort of social-linguistic process whereby you get accosted, it's a biblical event primarily, a battle between 2 tribes, and where, if you like, the murdering tribe is one that asks, in order to identify if you are one of us or not, asks of somebody else to pronounce a sound that is extremely difficult to pronounce if you are not of that language. And that is the history of the Shibboleth. And the last Shibboleth, large-scale Shibboleth that we know about is in 1937 in Haiti, a Shibboleth that took place between Spanish-speaking Dominican Republicans asking Haiti Creolians to say the word perejil by rolling the R, and then the incapacity to roll the R, identify them. And this massacre was about 30,000 people were massacred for this incapacity or inability to speak that letter, to speak that word without an accent. So this whole idea of accented practice, down to the detail of one letter, and that is basically a matter of life and death, what you have in your mouth, what you have in the jaws of speech, I find really fascinating and terrifying. And so I got engaged involved with a composer called Kieran Marr, who works a lot with issues of perception and the psychoacoustic experiments, and we developed a piece together called Say Parsley. And the first time and this was our motto, how you speak will be used against you. And it was a way of trying to identify how we would, in a fairly abstract way, try and place those issues in contemporary fashions of differences between languages, differences between speech. So let me just, before I then proceed to the final showing of it, which is at the Anofini, let me show you a section or a small data piece that we produced for a showing that took place in Belgium. And Belgium is one of those countries that has an official bilingualism, and as you know, they are still really struggling and fighting with that very notion. And so to think about that piece of the Shibboleth and of the linguistic sort of violence was really very interesting, and led me to add this piece to the work Say Parsley. So I had it up, but it sort of disappeared in the... so I'll just find it like this. Okay. This is a very short piece. It was set up in quite a big sort of open installation space as part of a show called Die Bush, which was a group show curated by a British artist called Imogen Stidworthy. And it was at MOCA, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Antwerp, that we did that. And this is how I was looking at that issue then. So this is the piece itself rather than the piece in its setting. Very short, but on a loop, so. Pig, fig, fag, fog, frog, frig, trig, trim, tram, trum, trum, trumpet, crumpet, crumple, crumble, rumble, rumble, rubble, bubble, huddle, cuddle, curdle, girdle, girdle, turgle, turtle, myrtle, mortal, portal, portly, partly, parsley, partly, portly, portal, mortal, myrtle, turtle, turtle, girdle, girdle, curdle, cuddle, puddle, bubble, rubble, rumble, rumple, crumple, crumple, crumpet, trumpet, trump, tram, tram, trim, trig, frig, frog, fog, fag, fig, pig. Okay. Just wanted to briefly take you through the way we then set it up in, when we were invited by Neon Fiji to set it up as part of their season on Lingua Franca, that was last year, I was thinking about what it would be, what material I could bring to it at that point, because there was again this idea of the reciting of the work. And one of the things, of course, that is very much part of a type of stigmatized letter in English and British culture is the letter H. There's that expression of not dropping one's H. And so I took that literally, and we created 5,000 small tags, badges that people were able to help themselves to, which they did. And I've seen some of them circulate all the way up to Finland on one occasion, which was really interesting and fun, that the letter actually does manage to get carried away. And then what was left was an alphabet called an alphabet, of course with the missing letter, of 25 letters at the end of plumb lines. And I'd used that device of the hanging plumb lines in the first Say Parsley. Again, just to think about balancing and just in an abstract but sort of present way, signify ideas of weight, gravity, balancing, what settles and how it settles. And so under each of these 25 plumb lines you have a letter. And people really took to that and sort of just sort of circulating around, handling these weights, and kids that were coming into the show were also sort of very happy to play around with them. So it became sort of nearly an educational sort of aspect. So that was a project that has been with me now for for 9 years, since we've done 4 different types of sightings in 4 different environments. What I have been interested in doing is moving also away from that sort of rarefication that I'd done with my writing in order to do a piece like Say Parsley, and move into an environment that is on the contrary full of language, and where the whole issue of the inhabitation of language and the ideas of accent of language is also contained within the notion of history. And this book, Middle English, had a pendant which was an installation called Middling English, which I did at the John Hansard last year, and that's the video that I'll be showing you at the end. So very briefly, to take you through the book, the cover to that cover over there is from one of the books of Caxton, as one of England's first commercial publishers. So this is one encyclopedia, and he published the Canterbury Tales. And I've been working a lot on Chaucerian languages and thinking about Middle English as a historic language, but at a point of a sort of melting pot of English being made and moving away from French and Latin, the way he was trying to really create and stabilize an English that had its own frames of reference. And so I've been very interested in working with Chaucer, or through Chaucer, as you will see. And then to the left, heap of language based on a drawing by the American conceptual artist Robert Smithson. And this is literally the title, A Heap of Language. I find Smithson extremely interesting, not only for his interest in geology, but also for his adeptness at thinking with language, at thinking conceptually with language as much as with sculptural elements. And what he says when it comes to the heap of language, he says that language, or does he say writing? Of course that would be different. If he says language, he either says language is not built, no, language is built, not written. So it must be language and not writing, so built, not written. I can check it out if questioned on that point. But anyway, I find that aspect of his work extremely interesting, and so I flag it up immediately on the cover. There's also this whole notion of the performative instance of the drawing, so the writing and drawing, and then also Gordon Matta Clark with his conical intersects, which I find also very interesting for if you take it as a metaphor or a metonymy of a writing that is starting to look both in the depth of histories of language, and at the same time keep on sort of moving laterally across the different surfaces that are available. So let me see. The collection starts with an essay called Middling English, in which I expand on 4 different terms: the midden, in which I talk about Smithson and Gordon Matta Clark; the middle, in which I think about the way I've just described Chaucer, the 14th century, and think about contemporary Englishes, the way English is traveling, the way English is assimilating itself into other languages, and vice versa, other languages coming into and transforming the English language. I'm looking and I'm finding, in a very schematic way, a correspondence, and I'm enjoying that correspondence. Also, I think about the middling, which I just wanted to read you this little section here. What is the middling of English? A middling is a smoothing over, a tense flattening, an artificial erosion, a surface stiffening. It is a blanket and a spread of green. Gulf turfs are a good example of spatial middling. Heather Ackroyd and Dan Harvey are 2 artists who only ever work with grass, turf, industrial nature, living mini-lawn, as they call it, that keeps its green color even under stress and grows unimpeded into larger and larger structures. It happens whenever the mind of a language reorganizes blind spots into potholes, diffuses or homogenizes political reality into sand dunes, driving ranges, fairways, and hazards. And then I close on the 4th section, which is about the medal, which is a more optimistic sense of wanting to be sort of integrate, be part of language, but also reinventing it, trying to push at its terms and push at its structure. One way in which I've done that is by, as I said, engaging with Chaucer. Now, for me, not being British, to be engaging with Chaucer was really about learning about an aspect of English history, English linguistic history, and cultural literary history. So it was a very interesting process as well from the point of view of rethinking my practice in light of this, one of the major sort of starting points, or one of the blocks in relation to English literature. And I did it in different way. The host tale, this tale here, is a tale that was written taking for reference all the food and wine references in the Canterbury Tales, and there's quite a lot of them since they're going, the pub crawling basically their way to Canterbury. And I just use the Middle English for that, and I do it for a very specific reason. The fruit of every tala is for to say. De eter en drunker en danser en synger en playa. They soupen and they speaker, and drunken every strong ale at the beste. Now let us sitter and drunker, and Marcus Maria, and let us dinner as sooner as that ye may. Now, when I read this work in Scandinavia, I'm half Norwegian and I speak Norwegian, and when I read this work in Scandinavia, there are still a lot of pronunciations of Middle English that you find in the Scandinavian languages. This piece is about 10 minutes long to read, it's about 8 pages long, and really there is that whole sense that you can feel the Scandinavian pronunciation, therefore that sort of history of the English language also coming through and re-emerging. So there's a sense by which I sort of just applied my Norwegian to the pronunciation of Middle English. I spoke to a few medievalists about it, but I sort of applied it also as a sort of a sense of manifesting that aspect. other ways of thinking about this language and these tales is really to think about them as the narratives that they are, and social commentaries, and a sense of parodies of different modes and ways of behavior, and think about the different kind of functions that the discourses within the Canterbury Tales have. So I kind of found this article in the BBC during a papal visit in Poland, and I took a number of the sentences quite simply, and then started to manipulate them with some Chaucerian language, allowing myself to just signify some acts of translation quite explicitly, since I was also learning this language. Rome is the home of ice cream, and for generations burghers and pilgrims illic, these glade folk in joie and blisse at meta, have forsaken dessert at the inn for the simple plaisance of sitting outside with a takeaway cone. And that's the summer tale. And there's other tales. This tale here, the Not tale, is a really gorgeous section in the middle of or towards the end of the Knight's Tale, which is the funeral of one of the hero knights, Arcite, gets buried. And it's an extraordinary tale, extremely luscious. The language is very rich. The descriptions are splendid. And I was thinking about that in relation to a contemporary poetic or performative funeral, how one would think about burial. And so I did this with a piece, again holding myself here very much to the text, but as you'll see from the sections that I have bolded up, this is what I did with it. It's very short. The Not Tale Funeral. The great labor of appearance served the making of the pyre. But how, nor how also, how they shall not be told, shall not be told, nor how the gods, nor how the beasts and the birds, nor how the ground aghast, nor how the fire, first with straw, and then with drier, and then with grainer, and then with gold, and then. Now how a sight is laid like this, nor what, nor how, nor what she spake, nor what was her desire, nor what jewels when the fire, nor how some threw there, and some there, and there, and cups full of wine and milk and blood into the fire, into the fire, nor how 3 times, and 3 times with, and 3 times how, and how that, nor how, nor how, nor how, nor who, I cannot tell, nor can I say, but shortly to the point I turn and give my tale an end. And the final piece, which I then also featured inside the installation Middling English, is a longer piece which is sort of inspired by the bankers' plundering. And in this piece, I sort of started really to be freer of the material, of the linguistic material that I was dealing with. And so what I do here as well is that I start thinking about contemporary dystopic novels and films. So the Oh My Brother is an Anthony Burgess Clockwork Orange aspect. A lot of the syntax that I use is part of a now sort of cult classic called Ridley Walker from 1980, which is also extremely dystopic, where the language is completely reduced to the most bare syntax, and it's extremely violent conditions and conditions of speech. And that I also sort of put up with different kinds of references. A lot of financial language comes into play, and then some Middle English too. Some of that will be referred to back into the video, so I'm just going to, I think perhaps just show you the way it's written here and just read you that little section. All juiced with an armful of moolah, wanga, clams and squids, ducks stashed in identical black cases hanging from their hands, 2 suits, a mega pair of Smith, blue pills no doubt, reading how they're trading out to goodness, well stuporific, shaker-handers, hug and abuse each other on the back. It's a total blowout. We're talking millions as squillions, zillions and nanillions, billions and teramillions, just for creaming the topping. Oh, my brother. And then what happens is this one really has a very, very clear narrative where sort of tell each other a story, and one of them has they're in the pub now, and one of them has sort of managed to trick a ninja into separating himself from all his limbs, and so that's the whole story. And then they laugh and drink some more, and that's the end of the of the fried tale. You'll see some of it in the video. I think that's let me see if there was anything else. Projects that I think perhaps I should show you the video. The video was created also as a document, so it has an integrated interview with it. We nearly finished editing it. It is going to be published as part of a small DVD of works in January through the John Hansard. So this, I believe, is to the final draft, nearly finished production on that video. So let me show it to you. It's 14 minutes. Is that okay for, yeah? Okay. So we are here again. Let me see. Oh, that's easy. And you'll see that in this piece I start using other voices, actual other voices. Okay. Am I in the way, or can you? No, okay. It's fair to think that when one arrives to language truly grown, some's past body shape will be left blissfully in the dark, that one can start at another one. Perhaps I should have imagined that pleasure's not so bothered, that this body would lack most of the somatic and cultural presumptions familiar to standard bearers of a language and a country where daffodils are not so much spring flowers as wandering clouds. Indeed, how reliable with this light-headed roaming, a state of cultural aphasia, would one have to learn to embed the nursery rhyme, the cultural undercurrents, scaffoldings to sign and sense, create a developing infancy, a 3D speck of one's shape and skin, run through by rivers underground, always run through, or could one simply forego this one, and carry on from a poetic imaginary, eerily free of white rabbits, doubled up instead between unlikely Norwegian trolls and unrecognizable French childhood songs about bridges and ladies in medieval gowns. Words and vibrations, patterns of vibrations, patterns of vibrations, patterns of us into prefab, terrible resonance in the outlines. I found this sort of illustration of the way broadside would historically be hung on the walls. Either they would be carried by the street seller, or they might sometimes be hung on walls, a little bit like we do now with flyers and leaflets, that we just, put them on walls, glue them on walls. They're made of 4 broadsides, and 3 of these are original texts that I've written for the show, but that are very much sitting as part of my interest in Chaucerian language and tales, and so they're quite satiric in tone. All these ballads were not good literature, so there was a way of disregarding them. That was reclaimed in the 19th century, because suddenly that was, can we, feel that these ballads are actually this sort of forgotten pool of culture in Britain and England. But they were often texts that were based on, or they would say, based on original melodies. So it was always going to the known. They would always function through things that were already known, and then there would be ballads for executions. So they worked a bit like newspapers and tabloid presses and things. Because, for example, that piece here is a little bit of a call to arms, this piece 06, and I really wanted that sense of having flies that you would have in demonstrations as well, or whatever, but confusing the issue because they're sort of a subset of those that you can see, like they're assisting an old marching chant, but it's not advocating anything but more daring and more fire and less corruption. I wanted to play with all those different dimensions of demonstration language, call to arms, tales that were used as ballads, and then the device that was used historically to try and circulate those pieces. And I actually didn't want these sounds to go out. I wanted that sense of people staying in with the story, and people feel the need to stay in the story because you get grabbed by the narrative quite quickly. They're written in a very strange, combo, hybrid English that I've invented and stolen from a number of contemporary writers. I really wanted someone who's not a foreigner to English to read it, because then you hear that weird language. So you gave all the narrative and all the dilemmas about what that language is becoming. There's obviously in those 2 texts a sense that civic culture, civic values are at risk, corruption and violence and corruption and degradation, if you like. And that's why this whole idea of the street literature here, and this, and you can take the flies with you, and you can, that whole sense of a paraphernalia, which is nearly activist paraphernalia where you are really engaging with current British culture and aspect of it, with a sense of, hang on, justice, what is up now, all that idea of criminalization, stop and search, the foreign is still a real problem, immigration, refugees, only English matters, those kinds of things, really problematic. And so these are embedded in the work, a sense of a culture that is fraying socially, difficulty finding new values that we can share as a society, a refusal of new values, a refusal of new communities, those kinds of things.
Dame Justice does not worry unduly about all this, just asks for a top-up when needed. She's down to giving people what they deserve. No longer gives a smiling sod about the moral attributes or social benefits of equitable share out of wealth, or land, or health, or education, or how to work out well-being for the mostest, or the bestest ways of valuing people's skills, or establishing fair and durable structures, or thinking long-term, or facilitating technological access, or revisiting the rules of international exchange, or the balance of import-export, or the value of local trade, or determining the boundaries between life and death, or between breathing and unbreathing, or feeling and unfeeling, or animate and inanimate, or animal and human, or how to get out of the deep labyrinthine social, moral, spiritual, physiological bankruptcy engineered by brutal, omnipathological, so-called transnational trafficking, blood-sucked, oil-sprung, hyper-defunded plundered-prize.
Some never had a body to call their own before it was taken away. Some hade aldrig en kropp de kunde kalla sin egen för den blev revet bort. Some never had a chance to feel a body as their own before it was taken away. Som aldrig fick uppleva en kropp som sin egen för den blev revet bort.
Some never had a chance to feel a body as their own before it was taken away, sans même avoir senti un. Le corps d'emblée leur est arraché.
Some never had a chance to know their body before it was taken away. Som aldrig fick känna sin kropp för det blev revet bort.
Some were never free to speak their body before it was taken up and taken away. Sans même le libre corps leur être identifié, arraché. Some tried their body onto pleasure in it before it was taken up, beaten, violated, taken away.
Some of you are free
Sans
to
même
cease to
laisser
go
du
for
corps
them,
plaisir chopé,
whatever.
violé, arraché.
Some tried their body on to pleasure in it before it was taken up, beaten, violated, taken away. Some tog sin kropp på for å nyte den, for den ble løftet opp, slått, krenket, revet bort.
Some had their body for a time, then it too was taken away, or parts of it, même si, l'ayant connu un temps, le corps arraché ou en partie. Some thought they had their body safely, then were asked to leave it behind the door, or
Some
parts of
had
it.
their body for a time, then it too was taken away, or parts of it. From the very beginning of the process, I was interested in the issue of space. The notion of spatiality and text is very important to me. So how could I place the different elements that have made out this work into this gallery? We were trying to think of a structure that could be a trajectory in the space and at the same time could represent a sort of metaphor. So you'd have the idea of the architectural space as an outer structure for the human body, the socialized body. And then thinking about language as something that inhabits the body. So it's nearly like an inner structuring. The structure we ended up building is more like a diagram of the gallery itself. It follows the shape of the gallery. I'm always interested in this idea of suspension, lightness and weight, the fact of the mobility of this very heavy structure. It was very interesting to set up actually because these are continuous lines and we ended up having to work with the weights that you can see that are 6 kilos each. So in all there's 24 kilos that are supporting this very thin wire that you can see throughout the space. There was also this idea of the wires as poetic lines or lines like trade routes or even bloodlines. The structure itself looks a bit like an inverted sail, so there are other associations that we were trying to set up. I also like the idea of memory.